All right, let's just jump right in. For thousands of years, there's been one planet that's just captured the human imagination like nothing else: Saturn. It's a symbol that's so old, and it's packed with so many contradictions, it can feel impossible to get a handle on. But what if all those contradictions aren't a mistake? What if they actually form a kind of map, a timeless map of the human mind itself? That's what we're going to unpack today, this ancient psychodrama.
And this really gets us to the heart of the puzzle, right? How can the very same symbol, the same planet, mean total darkness? We're talking misfortune, sorcery, death, and at the exact same time mean divine redemption, hope, intellect, even the coming of a Messiah. I mean, that's not just a simple contradiction. It's a deep psychological paradox, and that's what we're going to dive into.
And here it is, laid out plain as day. The two faces of Saturn. On one side, you've got the negative pole. Ancient astrologers literally called it the most malevolent planet. It's all about restriction, feeling isolated, melancholy. But then you have this other side, the positive pole. And this is all about structure, deep thought, and even the divine intellect. This split, this fundamental duality, that's the engine driving our entire story.
So, how are we going to crack this thing? Well, we're going to use a toolkit with 3 different psychoanalytic lenses. First, we'll look at it through the lens of Carl Jung's archetypes. Then we'll switch to Jacques Lacan and his ideas about psychic structure. And we'll wrap up with Julia Kristeva's revolutionary take on all of this. And you'll see, by the end, how these all snap together into one really powerful matrix for understanding the mind.
Okay, first up, let's really dig into the puzzle itself. Because this whole duality thing, it wasn't just some abstract philosophical idea. As the historian Moshe Idel discovered, these two poles were like conceptual time bombs, just ticking away in history for centuries before they exploded into the real world with some pretty dramatic consequences.
And we're talking 2 major explosions. First, you've got the negative pole's eruption. There's a really compelling link some historians draw between Saturn's dark myths, the god who eats his own children, and the absolute horror of the witches' Sabbath that gripped Europe. Then, on the flip side, the positive pole just explodes in the 17th century with this messianic figure Sabbatai Tzevi. And get this, his name is literally the Hebrew word for Saturn. His whole mission of redemption was powered by a positive, mystical view of the planet.
All right, to really get how this is even possible, we need to grab our first lens, the work of Carl Jung. Now we're shifting away from historical events, and we're looking at the universal, inherited patterns that are buried deep inside the human psyche.
So the key idea for Jung is something he called the archetype. Just think of it like a primordial blueprint for the mind. It's a universal pattern or symbol that we all inherit as part of what he called a collective unconscious. These aren't things you learn. They're more like psychic templates that shape how we experience the world from the get-go.
And boom, this is where it just clicks. Saturn's 2 faces map perfectly onto what Jungians call the synex, or the father archetype. It's got a positive side, the wise old man, who brings law, order, and structure, but it also has this absolutely terrifying dark side, the devouring father, the tyrant, who, just like the myth, eats his own children and blocks any new life out of fear and rigidity. For Jung, this isn't just a myth, it's a psychic reality inside all of us.
But Jung gives us another key, and it comes from a really cool place: alchemy. In alchemy, Saturn is represented by the metal lead, and the alchemists called lead the prima materia, the first matter. Now, psychologically speaking, this isn't just a lump of metal. It represents the raw, chaotic, unconscious stuff of our own minds. Basically, what Jung would call our shadow.
And suddenly, this whole alchemical idea just flips the entire puzzle on its head. That negative side of Saturn, the darkness, the melancholy, the lead, it's not the end of the story. It's the necessary first step. From a Jungian point of view, you have to confront the lead of your own shadow to even begin what they called the great work. Only by doing that deep inner work can you eventually turn that lead into the gold of a whole integrated self. The darkness is where it all begins.
Okay, let's shift gears. We're putting down the Jungian lens for a second and picking up our next one, Jacques Lacan. This moves us away from Jung's psychic images and into Lacan's theory of psychic structure. And trust me, this gives us a whole new language for decoding this Saturn psychodrama.
So for Lacan, the world we live in, our reality, is basically built on what he calls the symbolic order. It's the world of language, rules, and culture. That positive, ordering side of Saturn, it's a perfect metaphor for what Lacan called the name of the father. Now, this isn't about your actual dad, it's the symbolic function of law itself, the principle that structures our mind and gives us our place in society.
But that leads to a huge question, right? What happens when that symbolic law breaks down? What if the name of the father just doesn't take? Well, according to Lacan, you get a catastrophic hole in the symbolic. And that, for him, is the very structure of psychosis. And this gives us a totally radical new way to look at our messiah, Sabbatai Tzevi.
And this gets us to one of Lacan's most famous and kind of chilling ideas. What gets rejected from the symbolic order, it doesn't just vanish, it comes back. But it comes back from the outside, in this raw, terrifying form he called the real. So from this angle, Sabbatai Tzevi's so-called bizarre acts, breaking the Sabbath, converting to another religion, you can see them as the eruption of this traumatic real right through a hole in the traditional religious law. His theology, in Lacanian terms, functions a lot like a psychotic structure.
But there is another twist here. Lacan has this brilliant little pun, perversion. It sounds like perversion, but it means a turning towards the Father. It's about a transgression, a breaking of the rules. That, paradoxically, is actually done to support the idea of the law. And the Sabbatian idea of redemption through sin, it's a perfect fit. It's a kind of holy sinning, a rule-breaking that's designed to prove that God's law is so absolute it can even absorb and redeem the worst possible sins.
All right, time for our third and final lens. And honestly, this one might be the biggest game changer of all. We're talking about the philosopher Julia Kristeva. And her move is so profound because she reframes this entire drama, not around the father, but around a lost connection to the mother. Kristeva dives right into the deep end, looking at melancholia through quotes like this one. For her, that Saturnine mood isn't just being sad, it's something very specific. It's an impossible mourning for something you lost before you even had words, a deep, pre-linguistic, primal connection to the mother.
And that brings us to this really powerful, kind of gross concept she has, the abject. The abject is everything that our nice, tidy symbolic order has to violently throw out just to keep itself stable. We're talking about the monstrous, the decayed, the things that break down boundaries. So that myth of the witch's Sabbath, with all its child murder and horror, from this perspective, it becomes a cultural catalog of the abject, a way society ritually casts out this monstrous feminine to protect the paternal law.
So where's the way out? How do you fix this? Well, the answer came from this absolutely revolutionary move inside of Jewish mysticism, specifically Kabbalah. The mystics did something incredible. They identified Saturn, the planet of cold, hard, paternal law, with a divine quality called Bina, which is known as the Great Mother, or the divine womb. They literally turned the planet of restriction into the source of all life.
And what's so incredible is that this ancient mystical move maps perfectly onto Kristeva's modern theory of language. She says language has two parts. There's the symbolic, that's the paternal side, all grammar, law, structure. But underneath it, there's the semiotic, and that's maternal. It's the rhythm, the drives, the bodily feeling that flows through language. So what the Kabbalists did was revolutionary. They injected that maternal, life-giving, semiotic drive right back into the cold paternal symbolic law.
Okay, so let's take a step back and put all three of our lenses on the table at once. Because when you combine them, you start to see how they form a single, incredibly powerful map of the mind, with this ancient symbol of Saturn right at the center of it all.
And here it is, the grand synthesis. Our whole journey is right here on this matrix. That negative pole of Saturn, the sorcery, the melancholy, we can read it as the Jungian shadow, or as the Lacanian real erupting, or as the Kristevan object. And that positive pole, the law and redemption, well, that maps right onto the wise old man, the symbolic order, and maybe most powerfully, that incredible moment when the paternal law gets reinfused with the revolutionary maternal drive.
So what does all this leave us with? It leaves us with a challenge, really. The story of Saturn shows that these ancient symbols aren't just stories. They're packed with deep psychological truths. It gives us a model, a way to decode the fundamental fights between structure and chaos, law and life, the paternal and the maternal. So the real question becomes, what conflicts that we see in our own world today are really just the latest version of this ancient psychodrama, just waiting for us to find the right lens to understand them?